Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. And today I'm delighted to talk to Professor Hassan Abdel Salam. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's incredible to be here with you, Paul, and to share this and the opportunity to connect with the audience here today.
Fantastic. You're most welcome. And you're based at the moment in the United States, where you are Professor of Strategy, Human Rights, and Sociology at the University of Minnesota. He has a PhD in sociology from New York University, 3 law degrees, and a psychology degree. His academic work focuses on identifying strategies that vulnerable individuals can overcome, how they can overcome significant problems such as torture, genocide, mass displacement, homelessness, and economic destitution. While living in Jerusalem in 2022, a national alert was launched against him and his research assistant in December of that year. And he was arrested, imprisoned, and tortured for a period of 23 days until eventually deported to North America. He's also the founder of the Abandon Biden campaign. But since obviously Biden's withdrawal from the race to be the next US president, Kamala Harris is now the likely nominee. If she's not the nominee already, I'm not sure. And you have said about her and US foreign policy towards Israel and the Palestinians the following, and I quote, "If she does not announce the shift in policy, then we will persist with what we will call the Abandon Harris campaign. Our destiny is November the 5th, working to make sure that because of genocide, a president or vice president lost the election at the hands of people of conscience, so that forever it's known that if you run on genocide, you will never win." End quote. The strong, stirring, powerful words. So perhaps you might like to just begin by telling us more about your story and perhaps going back to Jerusalem in 2022 and what happened.
Yes, thanks, Paul. And so in 2022, I set out to go to occupied Palestine to conduct research as a professor of human rights. My work is primarily in determining ways of preventing or preempting genocide, torture, displacement, homelessness, destitution. And my work took me to the glimmering city of Jerusalem. I brought my research student assistant, Khaled Qansu, with me to Jerusalem. We lived in the old city as well as the adjacent Silwan for part of the year 2022. And the idea was to examine and study how the occupation impacted the youth of Jerusalem, but also more broadly in the West Bank, in places like Hebron, Nablus, Abu Dis, which is adjacent to Jerusalem. And during that time, we witnessed the sheer brutality of Israeli forces, the extraordinary testimony of people on an ongoing basis who told us stories of their families being imprisoned, of attacks, of their mothers being attacked by militia, by settlers, by folks who couldn't get married or couldn't get a job because of the radical discrimination in the state, both of Israel as well as in the occupied territories as they're described. For us, the whole entire land we describe as occupied Palestine. But each of these different parts, people are treated differently. But the overall experience of the people was that they were under occupation, their lives were impacted, and they were experiencing the destruction of the policies that the Israeli government is purveying. Now, what we were doing was primarily in Al-Aqsa Masjid, which was the primary site of our research, where we saw youth activists protest and resist, literally attack the forces on Al-Aqsa. One of the most extraordinary things that I experienced, among the many things that ultimately then led to my detention as well as that of my research assistant, the torture we experienced, the interrogation, the hunger strike, all of this was what punctuated our trip. But the first and the beginning was when I put sight entering into the extraordinary enclave of Al-Aqsa, and then seeing juxtaposed to the experience of the lamps and the red carpet and the huge mimbar was this army that just appeared in the morning.
Wow.
Women and men with pistols in huge number in formation, right in the masjid with their shoes. And that was when I realized, subhanallah, this is truly an occupation, that they were as adjacent to me as the moment when I give my salam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, that they would welcome me in my trip, that the experience was befuddling. Why were they even there if there was an occupation? And so we began asking questions and learning more from the youth that we worked with, almost 20 to 40 youth, many of which, by the way, ultimately ended up with us in prison in that December. I arrived on February 3rd, 2022.
So you were there for what, nearly the whole year, because you left perhaps in December, I think. So what happened over those months that led you to be arrested, imprisoned ultimately?
So when we started off, our primary mission was to conduct research, but as a strategist, I couldn't hold myself. And it was actually part of our intent, Brother Khalid and I, to speak to the youth who are incredibly curious, who really desire the best for this ummah, who cry in sujood in Ramadan. And so we shared what we believed were strategies that were peaceful, nonviolent, to bring attention to their plight. The reason why we thought it was important to do so was because everywhere we go in the world, and particularly in the United States, there's complete ignorance about the brutality of this occupation. When people think of human rights violations, they don't think automatically of Israel. They think of other parts of the world, China, Myanmar, places like Venezuela. But when it comes to occupy Palestine, it's often perceived as a light. And so we felt that it was essential that the world learn about the experiences of these youth. And we called for a type of protest no different than what occurred in 2011 in Tahrir Square in Cairo, in Egypt, for people to come out en masse with their tents, with their families, with their food, and stationary, stand their ground and begin to tell their stories, inviting the media and the world to learn about their experiences.
Really? Wow. That's amazing. So what happened? You had this strategy, you called, invited people to participate in this strategic event. So what actually happened next?
At every turn, we saw that the youth were extremely fearful, that on the one hand, they wanted to join us, wanted to be with us. We made a call for the liberation of Palestine. We put it on YouTube in August. And we were working and strategizing in the very heart of Al-Aqsa. And people were interested, and we would talk together, go to different sites around Jerusalem, discussing this strategy. But every time we were on the precipice of potentially engaging the strategy, there were challenges, and never did it occur. It never actually came to fruition. So I speak of strategy, but in effect, it was something that was spoken about, something that we networked with people and organized, and never did it take place. And so we even mentioned a site from which it would take place in Silwan, and that it never actually happened. And this was one of the most disorienting things, is that you saw the passion, but also there was a constant fear. And it wasn't merely a type of fear of being attacked or imprisoned. It was the fear that this would open up a box that couldn't be contained, that their families and their friends would all be attacked as well, because they in the state of Israel engages in collective punishment.
Yeah.
And there were also always questions about the viability of the strategy. Every time I would say that the worst that can happen is that we're imprisoned, or perhaps even we could be possibly killed, that would bring a lot of attention to the plight. Typically, when we were talking 2022, because these are peaceful protests, many of these forces are trained to deal with media. Like they come, a lot of folks don't know, when the police and the forces come into Al-Aqsa in the enclave, they have someone with a camera.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is to create a counter narrative to the types of allegations we would make, and to present themselves as protecting protesters or being peaceful, even while they're holding munitions, guns in our faces. And so I made the case that because of their interest before the media, because they seek to establish themselves as a peaceful party seeking goodness, etc., and that's part of their propaganda and the marketing they engage in. If we position ourselves in ways that would create a sufficient fear by those forces, such as we have our cameras, we invite CNN, we invite all the American and international media, the likelihood of killing us would be slim, even if they might imprison us, etc. The concern was, from a strategic standpoint, who would end up being the first actors that appear on the site, and that would we be able to mobilize sufficient numbers to come to that particular site before the forces would be alerted. Because what they do is then they come, grab everyone, preempt it, and so there are no opportunities to actually speak out. And we would need a critical mass before the media would see this as a story.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a timing issue.
Exactly. So how do you overcome that? Because it seems like a race between yourself and the Israelis to, assemble and get your message out before the opposition turn up and derail it. So how long did you have, and how did it work?
Yes, and it has only, there's almost possibly, you could argue, seconds or minutes before every part of Silwan and Jerusalem has cameras.
Right.
And a lot of folks don't realize that everybody is being monitored. It's not just Gaza that happens to be an open air prison. The whole of occupied Palestine, technology has made occupation a viable reality. That our cameras, our technologies, all the equipment and the tanks and the police forces, their monitoring of WhatsApp, of Telegram, all of these different apps really set the stage for them to preempt any of these initiatives. We have such limited time. In the meantime, or in the meanwhile, when we speak to folks, you never know if somebody is a jasus, a person who will, for money or other interests, sort of let the forces know that we're planning this strategy. And because of the fear of the jasus, or the asafir, it's translated as the birds. It's a colloquial term that's used by Palestinian youth to say people who spy or tell, they rat on you, and they effectively create this arrangement with the forces. They get these benefits, money, and other opportunities in exchange for telling on youth or other initiatives that might be taking place. And so most of the youth were often fearful. And in the beginning, they were actually fearful, like, what is Dr. Hassan telling us here? Until we managed to get a lot of trust. So there are such barriers of entry. It's extraordinary. The trust factor, the temporal element, the time lags before they might appear on site, the media appearing for us to invite them, the fact that we always have the possibility that even if the media is there, these forces sometimes make the case that better to have 15 minutes of painful media coverage rather than 2 weeks of protests that might take place. And so there's still always a possibility of death and injury and collective punishment. I literally saw, Paul, before me the act of collective punishment. And so I knew the reality that these youth were talking about when one day in Silwan, in the car, I saw with Brother Khalid them demolish a huge home, traditional, like multiple families in it. And there, throughout Silwan, the forces were positioned, anticipating any resistance. And everybody was fearful, looking left and right. We went to the grocery store after the demolition, and people were completely on edge, worrying that any of us could be Israeli forces spying, because they tried to appear Muslim and Palestinian while investigating, is there anyone resisting while we destroy this home? An act of remarkable deterrence. While we were attempting to strategize against these forces, they're perpetually strategizing themselves against the residents of Silwan.
Extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. So how did this lead ultimately to your arrest and imprisonment?
Yes, so I was continuously delivering speeches and working with the youth, and we were attempting to go to the West Bank and speak to groups of youth to deploy this strategy, not from Jerusalem, where there's far more, attention in terms of cameras, in terms of forces that are very equipped. And we would go to the north of the West Bank, where there's greater opportunities for action because Israeli forces are not within the cities. So, for example, in Nablus, and Brother Khalid was returning back into occupied Palestine, and I was heading on December 1st. So we were supposed to go on December 2nd or December 3rd to the north of the West Bank to communicate this work and to begin these protests. And on December 1st, Brother Khalid was on the border, and he apparently, I hadn't known that yet, was detained. He was coming in from Jordan. And immediately when they identified him, he was arrested, handcuffed, placed into a car in an odd crawling position, sort of his hands down on the floor, his back also on the floor, so crutching in the car with these handcuffs and heading to Jerusalem. And I was attempting to call and contact him, and I could see that just one check mark, and I'm like, what's going on? Why is Brother Khalid? And there I was heading to my primary site of research, expecting to be one of my last salahs to Al-Aqsa before heading with Brother Khalid to the north of the West Bank. And I left Silwan, walking up the mountains all the way to the old city, past its beautiful walls. And as I was entering into the gate, one of the forces at the gates, and there are forces at every gate of Al-Aqsa. It's as though you're going through the airport, many of which despise me. And one person who really hates me just was going through his phone, delicious. I could see on his face a far greater smile than appears on my face now, just scrolling. And he's like, stop, wait. And I'm sort of wondering what's going on. I passed this gate again and again, despite their look of disgust when I passed them. And there they were. There I was, a picture of me, my beard. I could identify myself. And he looked at me, and then began a chapter of research, of ethnography unimaginable. I was handcuffed on my hands, on my legs, the metallic cold going into my legs, coiling into my skin, the burning my nerves, stripped, naked, paraded through the old city, thrown into a van, taken to the Meskubeya infamous prison, taken to a basement, poorly lit, my companion a toilet hole, no windows behind two metallic doors, anxiety, heart pumping with the clanking of the keys as they would try to take me again and again to my interrogation, sleep deprived, tortured, again and again, shifts of different intelligence officers. Why are you here? What does it mean that you came to end the occupation? Who are these youth? They would point behind these walls is Imran, behind those walls is Sheikh Sami. These are youth that we were working with, many of which trying to sort of generate guilt were folks who trusted us and who are now being harmed, and they didn't have the power of saying they weren't from Palestine. And so they did whatever, and I don't even know exactly what happened to them. My understanding is that based on some of the youth after I arrived, that they were thoroughly tortured, attacked, and again and again, interrogation. One man saying that he cleans himself every day with bleach because he talks to filth like me. Huge humiliation that I'm less than spit, and shouting, sometimes countless officers questioning me in multiple languages, asking me questions about my background, about what does it mean to end the occupation, what type of strategies I'm deploying, who was involved. And anytime I refused to provide names or provide strategies, there would be shouting, attempts to describe my resistance as futile, that they have lie detectors, that they have means of extracting information, that people here all around are telling us what you've been doing in Jerusalem. And so it was an experience I never imagined. It was also a research project that took formation in a manner that was truly informative. And so while there was a huge trauma, when I set foot into prison with my handcuffs in hand, it was truly the experience of a lifetime for a professor who just didn't understand the occupation. And then when they lifted the blindfolds that they constantly placed on me, claustrophobic, and when I looked upon this prison and the youth that I encountered, I discovered that the occupation was underground. That's countless Palestinians every day, that I might have been an exception coming from the West, that they felt they were forced, in their view, to imprison me, that it goes contrary to their marketing, that someone like me would have the capacity because I would return to speak out, that every day this has been happening in Palestine, and that many of the youth are entrapped, are imprisoned in huge numbers, that there are communities underground and in prisons built all across Palestine. And one of the most disturbing things is what I learned when we came back. Brother Khalid and I were separated, and for a brief time, for 2 days, we were alone. And they attacked him in a very different way. They wanted to understand what was my strategy, and they saw that I was resistant. They took Brother Khalid to a place called Asqalan, in Hebrew, Ashkelon, in the north of Gaza, in a prison. And Brother Khalid confronted the trauma of naivete. He thought everyone around him was Palestinian, but it was sort of like the Truman Show. If folks know that. Everybody was in Israeli intelligence, and they would ask him to come and do halaqas and to pray and lead the prayer before them. And the halaqa was about what are the ideas of Sheikh Hassan. And he didn't know, living all his life outside of occupied Palestine. He was a University of Minnesota student. And he just told them everything. And when they were happy with what they received, they took him back to Mescobeya, the prison I was residing in.
It's an extraordinary story. So thank you for sharing an incredibly difficult story. Are you able at this stage to, in whatever words you choose, to talk about the torture that you were forced to undergo?
Absolutely, yeah. And the torture wasn't the same as the Palestinian youth who are beaten up and attacked. The torture that we endured involved deception, blindfolding, being in confined spaces, sleep deprivation, constant interrogation, being placed in poorly lit places. I didn't eat for 12 days. That was by my own will. And the experience of constantly being threatened, the anxiety of what will happen. There were always threats, like it seemed at one point they would waterboard me, but instead they stripped me and placed other clothing on me, clothing that identifies me as a freedom fighter. They seem to have two color coding clothing systems. One is orange if you're actually being subject to the criminal code, like you committed murder or theft, and one for those who are fighting against the occupation. I thought that was kind of unusual, but they seem to want to separate and make it very identifiable. The torture was never at the level that many of the youth experience, which is that they were beaten. I just happened to be handcuffed. The physical pain of being handcuffed, of being walked from one place to the next with these handcuffs, the challenges of being taken in vehicles with these handcuffs on my hands, on my legs. So I was, because I'm blindfolded, I was pushed over, that put behind very small confined spaces in cars or vans as we head to the courts. And of course, in the case of Brother Khalid, being placed in very odd positions. And so one of the things that happened often with me when I was questioned is that I would be placed in a particular position on the chair, handcuffed to the chair, and they can do anything they want, constantly being questioned and asked again and again about what we're doing and why we're here. I felt from the experience, they placed a priority on learning as much information as they could about me, as opposed to pursuing a punitive project with me. Whereas with the youth, seemed that their mere association with us was being punished.
Do you think that the fact that you and Khalid were both American citizens also affected your treatment at the hands of these people?
Absolutely. The idea that we came from the West, that we were not Palestinian, often was a fear, it seemed, because I would ask that embassies would know that we were here in prison. We were told that they were informed. But if I may, one of the most disturbing things analogical to what's happening now as we see it in the bombardments in Gaza and how they're being received by the media and by the overall public is that the US government, the Canadian government, I happen to be a Canadian citizen who's a US permanent resident, and Brother Khalid is an American citizen. And so both were informed, both embassies, and both governments did nothing. It seemed that they, when told that these forces imprisoned us, assumed there must be something wrong with us, and they just willfully blind allowed their attacks, their torture, their detention to take place. And later on, I learned they were fully knowledgeable and they did nothing. My father insisting that external affairs in Canada speak out, and all the information was purely just information. They would just report that I was and happened to be in Mescubia, but there was no attempt to release me. And in the United States, similarly, when we came back to the US, Brother Khalid and I were questioned as though we did something wrong.
Who are you questioned by? What, the border people or the FBI, or who took the interest primarily?
The FBI spoke to Brother Khalid and Border Control spoke to me. I was deported to Toronto, Canada. He was deported to New York, the United States. I then, after a week in Canada, I went to the United States. And then when I landed, I then was processed and greeted at the gate. I'm not supposed to be greeted at the gate because usually you go through immigration in Canada. They have an agreement between both countries.
Yeah.
And exceptionally, there they were right outside the plane. And they took me to a room, closed the door, and the interrogation began. Later on, I should also let you know, the FBI did pursue us, questioning Brother Khalid's family, seeking that we would speak to them further about our plans and our strategies. Of course, our attorney made sure that we never spoke to them, which is our right living in the United States. A very different world than the one we experience in occupied Palestine.
Indeed. And the University of Minnesota, where you are a professor, how did they receive you back, and what was their view of what had happened to you? Were they understanding at all, or what was their response to your experience?
Yeah, and the University of Minnesota, where I had many colleagues, mentors, friends, when I entered and returned back to the university, and I was teaching, my courses, in this case, I was teaching a course, Global Islamophobia, I experienced much of what I taught. The Islamophobia was so evident. I would go into a hallway and my colleagues who were excited to see me or talk to me in many other occasions just fled. And I think that the question they were asking was, how could a professor in one of the luminary universities of our country be imprisoned for 23 days? There must have been something. And they were very disturbed, I could tell, many of which never described to me why they were disturbed. They simply had a covenant that they told themselves never to speak to me. And one of my mentors, he was struggling. I could see the dissonance in his words and on his face. He was like, "What? You were imprisoned, Hassan?" He said it with empathy, and I could see he was processing, looking at the wall. This was, by the way, in a faculty meeting. He happened to sit beside me just to hear about me, and I told him what happened. And then he said, he was like, reflexively, he responded, "You have to contest it. It's a democracy."
What, Israel's a democracy?
Yes, yes. And I could see that he was struggling with his vision of Israel and the fact that someone he loves, someone he respects, someone who brought a Holocaust survivor to his global Islamophobia course, someone he collaborated with, he invited to his class to talk about human rights, happened to be imprisoned by a government that he loved and respected. And what was unbelievable was that I saw this as the beginning of potential change, but it was also a struggle for him that then limited our friendship and our capacity for connection. And so this is the challenge, by the way, and this is a challenge even many people, many dais could talk about this, that you can form friendships and take people out to pizza, what our beloved, Hamza talks about, taking people out and so on.
It's always pizza, by the way. I'm thinking, dude, be more imaginative. Think of curries, think of fish and chips, even in England, What's this thing about pizza all the time? Sorry.
It's true. I'm always hearing it.
Mm.
And the reality is that there comes a point where there's a crossroad, right? Where, you know, the buck stops with you, and you sort of have to deliver the truth. You have to say, you must read the Quran. Our friendship, true, will remain. But let me tell you a story that was said over and over again, that the Prophet ﷺ came to save all of us from a coming hellfire, that their flicker of a moment will pass and we will appear as throngs before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes we fear that conversation, even after hours of doing, you know, eating fish and chips and talking together. And so one of the things that I see in this question, I see it in the protests, is that people are open, but the initial phase is ambivalence, and it's hard. When I came back to America, I experienced a second trauma. The first was the detention and the torture. My second trauma was loneliness. My colleagues abandoned me, friends who I uncovered who couldn't tolerate the thought that I could be imprisoned by forces that they perceived as bringing order, and that I probably was a piece of the chaos that they were trying to control, and not that I was someone fighting for liberation. And so even the word occupation, the word brutality and torture, I could see these were not the words that you associate with the word Israel.
It just strikes me as someone who's obviously not American, although I have been to the States a number of times. And I don't mean to be rude about America, but it just strikes me as an outsider that your media, is a very controlled media, and it brainwashes virtually the whole population. And I don't mean that Americans are stupid, but it just seems an incredible reality of America, or almost unique in the West. There is such a monolithic, almost like totalitarian ideology that's pumped out of all. It doesn't matter if you're allegedly Democrat or Republican, everyone seems to be seeing it the same way. And the example of that is this incredible event recently when the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu went to Congress, the United States Congress in Washington, and he got multiple standing ovations as if he was some kind of demigod. And I mean, this guy is a war criminal. You know, the International Court of Justice have issued arrest warrants because he is guilty of crimes against humanity, you know, and he goes to Congress and everyone's clapping him like some kind of hero. And I'm thinking, to outsiders, this just seems like madness. How can you invite a war criminal to address the most distinguished representatives of your democracy in Washington? What the hell is going on there? You know, so it looks really weird from the outside that your representatives in Congress are doing this for someone who the rest of the world so clearly sees as someone who has continuously incited genocide in the language he has used, openly, vocally, in front of the camera, calling the and other members of his cabinet, of course, as well, the whole government, I mean. And yet he's still honored in the halls of power in Washington. I think there's something very wrong there. There's something very wrong with a democracy that allows this to happen. And generally, I find it bewildering, to be honest. And I think the rest of the planet looks at this and think, what the hell is going on in America? And unfortunately, because you are the superpower, you are the hegemonic dominant power, we all had to put up with it as well. And we suffer the consequences of this craziness, really. So, I mean, that's kind of my little rant. But how this guy ended up addressing Congress, and the congressman bouncing up and down, giving him standing ovations every minute. It was like kind of weird movie where some kind of Matrix movie where reality has become distorted and it's not the real world anymore. Anyway.
Absolutely. No, you're 100%. And one of the things that's extraordinary is the invitation of an autocrat in the halls of Congress. I was behind those walls, the fences set by the police in DC that day, and I saw the remarkable honor and respect they have for one of the most extraordinary terrorists that this planet has seen, Netanyahu, who uses technology and the government apparatus to destroy a people now on the verge of disintegration, and he is met with ovations, one after another, after another. And for all that hear my message now, know that me and folks working with us in our movement were there on Capitol Hill, where Congress is, and we were protesting, and the police were everywhere, separating us, putting up fences, telling us to go to another road, to another street, know that this was blocked, and they would never tell us all the parts were blocked. We had to do a press conference before the Supreme Court. They prevented it even from ever happening. A land of freedom for which we couldn't even speak out against this genocider, who was a genocider before the events of October 2023.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And so absolutely, to the point that Brother Paul mentioned, I do think it's really important to understand it is in the interest of this planet for the people of America to not be fed the media diet that they're getting on a daily basis. That is based on a contract with the state of Israel, a marketing public relations contract that communicates that Israel is light and righteousness, a place of goodness, and not the place of autocracy, dictatorship that bombs people on an ongoing basis and then proclaims that they're terrorists. What's truly extraordinary is that when you finally meet a person in any of these protests or a colleague or friend, and you just begin to share the experiences of the friends you met in Palestine, you see the shift happening almost immediately. That they're on principle, they would say, if that is happening, I'm against that. But I need to learn more. I need to learn more about what's taking place. And so October 2023, it's televised. We're in the era of social media. We're seeing every day in color, the mother running, trying to protect her children, the amputated bodies, the children for which we see their bones through their skin, the bombardments and the smoke that is emitted, the planes that come in and out to an innocent people who lack any technology. And so what is there but the words and the images for which we see now on an ongoing basis? And the media tries to block it. And people constantly call for an embargo, which we do at the Abandon Biden movement. There be an embargo, military embargo from the United States to Israel. But stop the embargo from the media, controlled, that only displays a picture of Israel that is completely contrary to the reality. I come, as I mentioned, my story is not even in Gaza. It's in Jerusalem, which is theoretically not part of the West Bank and not part of Gaza. And there you see all the evidence of the occupation, the terror experienced on a daily basis, the demolitions, the attacks, the formations on Al-Aqsa, the people who come with their shoes, ask for identification because of the mere act of praying. And that is in the old city. And so this was always happening, and the media was not speaking out. And we have every interest, and this is for all our brothers and sisters in Britain, in Myanmar, in Australia, in Egypt, in Syria, to ensure that they speak out, that they put their messages in social media for all the world to know about the oppression that our people suffer all through the Ummah and in Palestine in particular.
Yeah, you mentioned the Ummah there just at the end, and this is the case, that they are part of the global family of Muslims. They're not some kind of separate nation or group. They are our brothers and sisters in the sense that will last forever, in a very real, deep sense. So yeah, they are family in that sense, part of the Ummah. I mean, it's a small thing in a way. Just it's been reported in the media yesterday and today that the British government, rather quietly, and I suspect deliberately keeping it very quiet, has actually stopped exporting weapons to Israel. Actually, the way they've done it is very, very quietly and not making announcements, but it's clear that they have actually, they basically stopped the export licenses for weapons to Israel. So this is a new Labour government here. So that's something. I mean, it's too late. It's whatever. But there is something changing, I think, finally, in some places in the world. And talking of change, potentially, perhaps we can move on to Kamala Harris, who is likely to be the nominee for President of the United States, Biden's successor in a way. Now, I mean, it must be said, she's been full on with the administration. She's vice president. I mean, she has completely been part of Biden's foreign policy, his support for genocide, for Israel, everything. So I just thinking, well, how on earth can she distance herself from what she's even doing now, being vice president to Biden? So, I mean, what is it the case? Maybe she really secretly has a different view. Does she perhaps have potential to show more humanity towards the Palestinians, or what? Who is she, do you think, vis-a-vis these issues? And is she someone that Muslims can have a little bit of hope for? Because the alternative is Trump, of course. And if you think Biden's bad, good grief, you know, this guy's something else. So, what's your take on Harris, do you think?
Yeah, so at the Abandon Biden movement, we set out to call to the president in October for a permanent ceasefire. On October 27th, we had an ultimatum call that he declared that there be a permanent ceasefire by October 31st. And of course, history was written that there would not be such a permanent ceasefire called by the president. And on November 1st, the first Abandon Biden signs emerge from Minnesota to Michigan to Arizona, all the way to Pennsylvania. We had launches of Abandon Biden and the campaign began. We went into the primary, which is a set of elections that select the Democratic candidate. We showed that we had the numbers to actually change this election, to determine this election, that Muslim Americans and their allies had sufficient percentages to make sure that certain states, which we call swing states, where the margins are often very slim, there are sufficient Muslim American populations in those states: Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, to make the difference. And so we launched campaigns in those states, and we showed in the primary, which happened between January and June, that in those critical states, we had those numbers when we came out and voted uncommitted. We voted not for President Biden or for any other Democratic candidate, but we voted this category called uncommitted. It was meant to be a demonstration of our capacity, because when we launched Abandon Biden, the president sent a surrogate to tell us, stop the conference. And they tried to suppress the emergence of the movement. And that was launched collectively with representatives from all the swing states in a conference in Dearborn, Michigan on December 2nd. And so they wanted to make every effort to stop that. It was globally covered, that conference. And we then went from our launches to the primary campaign, where we showed we had those numbers and our strategy was redeemed, to the encampments in the universities, erected tents, standing side by side with non-Muslims, courageous, speaking out against this genocide. And now we came to a point, after demanding that the president drop out, he dropped out, and Kamala Harris emerged as the presumptive nominee. On July 22nd, before the Supreme Court, the Abandon Biden movement came out and said that we would give Kamala Harris the opportunity to clarify her position on the genocide.
Right.
And that we demand an unconditional permanent ceasefire consistent with the International Court of Justice, and that a full embargo, not a single cent or dollar of military aid, should be ever sent to Israel, the state of Israel. The media conscientiously took our message to the campaign, and they asked for comment, and they deflected and pushed them away. They didn't want to provide a comment. Folks in Michigan met with the campaign or surrogates, and nothing close to a whisper of what our demands were. You're correct. She speaks in soft terms, using the word heartbreaking. the events in Gaza,
Yeah, yeah.
but never does she back it up with policies.
No.
And she's now made clear that she's giving carte blanche to the state of Israel, and that she has actually been, she's literally the vice president, she actually has been involved in the policy making in the past year, that
Yeah.
she's a genocider.
Well, yeah, exactly. It would strike many people as she's been 100% completely a part of this whole government strategy towards Israel, that she's 100% complicit anyway. So, like for 2 years or something. So, how can we possibly suddenly expect her to become pro-Palestinian? Doesn't make any sense. That's not who she is. That's not what she's been doing as a vice president for a couple of years now. So, I guess it might be argued be naive to expect. And a politician coming up with warm words is what politicians do. They kiss babies, they say warm words, and then they do something else. Nothing changes. So, she's got her donors to think of, her campaign contributions, powerful backers, and they're the usual suspects, of course, I assume. So, they supported Biden. They invited to support her. Same terms and conditions apply, of course. Don't change anything. So I guess that kind of, if that's real politique here, then you're going to be having the Abandon Harris campaign, aren't you? You're going to be initiating that, I assume.
We're on the precipice of launching Abandon Harris, and we intend to do so this upcoming week. The idea here is for us to ensure that we punish the vice president for the genocide that's been taking place in occupied Palestine, and that we take the blame for it, or the credit, in an attempt to buy power, to create a reckoning in the Democratic Party, for which Harris is a member of, and to reorient the Republican Party. Because in the United States, these two large parties have the exact same policy on Israel.
Yeah.
And so we need to do something dramatic to transform the political landscape, and to signal to the landscape that you will be punished if you engage in genocide. And that it should be known in history that at the hands of people of conscience, we ensured that a vice president complicit in the genocide lost because of their endorsement of that genocide.
But is there not a danger in, if you are successful in your strategy, okay, she loses, that means Trump wins? Are you not out of the frying pan into the fire?
Yes. And absolutely, Paul, that has been the big question. And I always say to folks who ask this from the very beginning of October, right now, a lot of the Muslim community, Muslim American community, and our allies are on board with this strategy. But in the beginning, there was skepticism, and everyone asked that stunning, critical, obvious question: what about Trump? And if, in effect, what I have been saying is, we have a strategy, we don't have a candidate. All the candidates are despicable. When you're this vulnerable, all you have is an attempt to say, we can make a difference. We are powerful. If we were to vote for Biden after the genocide, it would be like rewarding someone who's killing our very parents and our friends, allowing them to do anything. And so what we have is an attempt, a strategy to show that we have power, that at our hands, we ensured someone like Biden or Harris cannot make it to the highest place of office, the highest position of power, someone who sits atop a superpower, and that we would depose them, seemingly vulnerable, unheard for a year. At the end, we came, we organized, we mobilized, and we voted against the president, not because we adore, like, admire, or believe in Trump, a despicable character, but that we want to show that we're powerful. Based on historical precedent, what happens is both parties take alert, and so it should mitigate the damage. But at Abandon Biden, we also say 4 years under any Republican is incomparable to 1 day in Gaza. That it's an argument based on sacrifice, that we all have to do this in order for us to begin to build power, because we come out protest after protest after protest, and both parties simply silent at all of our initiative. In fact, blocking us away, never answering our questions, setting up fences, when we approached Congress, when Netanyahu himself is treated as a person of honor, of greatness, of respect. And so we have a long way to go, but a huge transformation, an earthquake can happen if our organization, our mobilization is known to have actually deposed this administration.
Yeah, I mean, we've I mean, on a slightly smaller scale in the UK, in our recent general election, there was a thing called the Muslim vote in the UK, with a similar strategy to basically marginal seats to ensure that pro-genocide candidates, MPs, were not re-elected or were not elected at all. And there were some notable successes, actually. A handful of pro-Palestinian MPs were elected. Muslims who weren't in parliament before. So it did have an effect. There was a sense of here was a bloc, a Muslim vote that actually made a difference. Now, it didn't stop the Labour Party getting in, and they had supported the genocide quite publicly. They opposed any stopping of arms to Israel, even when they knew Israel was committing genocide. So they're as guilty as hell. But nevertheless, a point was made, and everyone took notice of it as well. So I guess in that sense, comparable, I guess, to what you're talking about. You're not going to stop one of these two. Is there lesser of two evils? Perhaps there's equally evil, but it might be a demonstration of Muslim political power to actually make a difference in some way, I suppose. And in that case, that could be seen as a victory, I suppose.
Absolutely. And we're declaring the deposition of the vice president and the president as a victory on November 5th. We're asking Muslim Americans to come out to vote as a function of the responsibility as Muslims, that this would be an extraordinary victory because it would be the first time we set out on this plan like a red carpet since October 2023, heading towards November 5th. That victory awaits, and this is a victory that can be shared with the entire ummah. It's one in which we show that even in small numbers, we can truly collectively transform the political landscape of this country. People don't fully understand that other groups have gained power by showing not just that they're capable of putting someone into power, but they're capable of removing someone from power. And so that is exactly what also, to a certain extent, took place in Britain. And the events that took place prior to the win by the Labour government by Muslim British communities is what likely led to this silent shift in strategy by Keir Starmer and others who are now, this is extraordinary, and every Muslim should be proud that the pressure placed led to military aid stopped from Britain, a huge power on the planet, from being sent to the state of Israel. And that's because of the organizing and the mobilization that happened for months, tireless in England and in Scotland and in Wales and in Northern Ireland. So people have to understand, and this is to Americans, that the example has already taken place in another Western country, in the United Kingdom. And it's very possible for this to take place in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, all of which are part of the Ummah. England and Wales and Michigan and Georgia, all of these are part of the Ummah. An Ummah that is so weak, that is so in need of a victory. An Ummah that is a single body, like our beloved Prophet ﷺ said. An Ummah that when one part of it feels pain, the whole of it feels pain. And that's why the people of Britain, the Muslims in Britain, felt the excruciating pain of the Palestinian people, and they organized. And independence won throughout the country. Many folks don't know this in the United States. Independents who are pro-Palestinian, neither the Labour government nor the conservatives, the Tories, won these seats. An independent won because of the issue of Palestine. And now, in weeks after winning, there's been a remarkable policy shift. And so make no mistake, the deception continues that people are told that small populations like Muslims in Britain or in America can't make a difference. It's incredibly untrue that minorities have made a remarkable difference. And now is our opportunity to use the Palestinian cause to transform the planet, because the US government corrupt in its intentions, projecting power throughout the ummah, has been a main factor for why justice is not in our ummah. And so to limit those constraints, we seek to alter DC, to use it as a vessel to transform this ummah and create opportunities. Right now in Egypt, in Syria, in Arabia, people are shouting in prison. In Myanmar, militias are attacking the Rohingya who are displaced in Bangladesh. Mass detentions of the Uyghurs, folks, corruption in Pakistan of people of goodness imprisoned who have won elections, but for whom they lie in order to prevent them from ruling. All of these problems are interrelated. And America has been complicit in each of these, whether you know them or not. And now, because of the Palestinian cause, Muslim Americans have organized, we've mobilized, we've united, and we want to use this opportunity to show our power, transform foreign policy, and bring civil rights into the actions of America throughout the world. And so we want it to be a force of good, but power doesn't concede until you show that you have the numbers, the power, the capacity to decide who will get elected.
Gosh, very moving. Well, thank you very much, Professor Hassan, for that incredibly moving story and the valuable information and knowledge you share about occupied Palestine as well, the realities there, which the world is increasingly aware of and needs to be aware of. Wish you luck with your strategies and endeavors in the US. Do keep us in touch. Let us know what happens. And inshallah, your successes in November.
Absolutely. I do want to share one thing to folks, just a story. When I was going through the court system in Jerusalem, one of the youth behind bars, before appearing before the judge, I would see some of the youth that were embedded with us as they await their hearings. And there was one young person I was temporarily incarcerated with before we would appear before the judge, Brother Faris. And he asked me, what would you do if you go back to America, back home? And I told him automatically I would speak out. At that point, I was being told I would stay forever in prison. There was no chance I would get out. So it was theoretical, but automatically I said I would speak out. And the most extraordinary thing appeared: a huge, brilliant smile, despite the torture. A young man in his early 20s, married, with family, worried, imprisoned. What brought him pleasure was the fact that I would be sharing this story here with Brother Paul and everyone who's listening to this. That folks don't fully know. They think victory is a complete emancipation of this ummah, and we desire that by the power and permission of Allah. But there's another victory. The victory that the people who suffer under the bombardments and the munitions and the incarcerations, all they want to hear is that we're out there speaking on their behalf, doing everything we can to share their stories. And so for the smiles to be placed on all our people around this ummah, and every person in this ummah is your people, never answer the question, where are you from? We're all within this ummah, a single body, that we cry together and we laugh together, we fast together, and we vote together. That by speaking out and voting is merely speech and is in honor of people like Brother Faris who want us to act, that we honor them and that we follow in the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ, who all he did was tell people the truth, and that in the encampments and in these moments and where we're behind a curtain at the ballot box, we speak the truth. Remembering, as the Prophet said, the greatest martyr was Hamza, and the one who followed was a man who spoke out against an unjust ruler and was killed. Speak out against the unjust ruler. Vote against the unjust ruler, the autocrats in the White House.
Gosh, powerful words, powerful. Well, thank you, Dr. Hassan, for that. It's much to think about, much to process, to be honest. Much to process.
Pleasure to be with you, Paul. And thank you, by the way, for your erudite and constant reflective work that's helping and supporting this ummah, always looking out. You've been truly a treasure, and I've benefited so greatly from your knowledge in comparative religion and all the folks you bring, trying to unite us all, and for us to have this opportunity through your platform to speak the truth and to pursue justice in the best tradition of our beloved Prophet and all the companions, those who cried out at the very beginning, Ahadun Ahad, like Bilal. This platform, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put huge barakah for it to be a light and a truth for this entire ummah.
Inshallah. Thank you very much. That's very generous words. Thank you for that prayer. Ameen to that. Ameen. Thank you. Well, maybe you'll come back later in the year and you can update us on your progress, inshallah. Until then, thank you very much, and we'll see you then. Thank you.
Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.